It's time to visit an old fan favorite, the 25 Subaru Outback, this time the XT trim level. This is the first time we've driven the turbocharged application, so we're going to talk about that during the drive. Jack's going to hit you up with the pricing in the shop. So we've driven an Outback before, we've driven many Subarus, so we're going to hit you with the pros and cons of what they do well and where they need work. Let's take a look at the outside. And, you know, again, this is a vehicle like many Subarus that is very quirky. It is just awkward looking with all the cladding, the ride height, all of that. Again, it's just not classically beautiful, but Subaru knows its customer base. They know their loyalty, and this is for people that want something that is practical, usable, and functional. And the outside does match its overall mechanical capabilities. This is a vehicle we've taken off-road on trails and even minor rock crawling, and I will tell you, and when you even get in the wilderness trims, which even have more ground clearance, this is not some like make-believe like rugged vehicle. It dominates most of the CUVs and SUVs in this segment. It will get you through everything with confidence if you have the right tires. So I will give the exterior styling a pass because it really does so many things so well. It is nuts what you can do with this thing. So people, you know, like that outside the functionality, so let's talk about what they do good on the inside. Let's start with the back because, you know, that's where you're going to be putting kids and pets. So there's this durability feeling to this car where you know you can get it dirty and it's easy to clean up. Well, they have improved the materials. That second row is very comfortable. There's also kind of a switch in the back to recline the rear seats, which is really nice on longer trips. You do have a release in the second row as well to put the seats down. But when you walk into the back in the hatch, which this is a wagon form factor, you can fit so much cargo in there. This is just an enormous like box on wheels. It has a remote release too to put down the second row seats, so you don't have to go into the second doors and fold the seats down. It's super easy to use in that way. And that's what they do really great with the Outback. The first row where you're spending most of your time for the driver, the seat, you know, is a little bit more give. It is very comfortable. It's not the best thing ever, but it does do a good job. But the adjustability up and down is great. You can move yourself basically into the floor, like where you can barely see over the steering wheel if you're short. But this seat goes so high that I could smash my head into the headliner. I think the adjustability is there that you can get for multiple drivers. When we talk about materials, you can see on the upper dash, it looks really nice in here. It's just with enough contrasting stitching and kind of the faux leather surfaces, it looks good in here. And I think most people are going to appreciate that. Again, it doesn't feel like a rental car. When you're spending near 40 grand, you don't want that. There's still physical controls everywhere. On the steering wheel, you could say it's a little cluttered. It still has like the rocker switch for your dimmer here, for the interior lighting, physical buttons to do pretty much everything, and a mechanical shifter. So I think they've done a really good job at keeping the classic tried and true things here, like an analog tach and gauge cluster is analog tach and speedometer with a little mini screen in the middle. You know where they're spending their money here, but then you get to some of the tech stuff. And this is where, I know I've said this before in Subaru, and I've given them a couple of years to see how it's been, and it still sucks. Their Starlink infotainment, when you first boot it up, I'm getting anxiety from seeing all the icons. They've tried to jam 20 pounds of shit into a 5-pound bag, and it would be one thing if it actually worked great, but when you boot this up in a sleep cycle, there's so much lag, things don't load, your tuning knob doesn't work, certain HVAC menus don't load, getting into certain things don't work right. It just makes no sense in the modern age why you would do this if you couldn't get it working. And I know they're developing this like 5 years ahead of time, and they have to double down with supply chain, and they're stuck with it. But I think in the next generation, there's enough brands that do this right with smaller screens, the things that people actually need, and they can focus on the things that Subaru is good at. This is definitely one of the worst parts about this car, and you have to really look at it to decide if you like it. The audio system in here has this Harman Kardon, and when I first listened to it, I just kind of laughed because either their engineers who designed this clearly did it as a joke to have dominating bass that just sounds like somebody turned the subwoofer up to like 10, that there's no separation between bass and all the other music. It just drowns it out. It's just, I can't believe this was a purposeful decision, but if it was, well, if you like bass, that's all you're going to hear. If it wasn't, they should spend like 50 G's on a consulting budget to get them to redo this to smooth it out. But when you look at the graphs, I mean, the bass levels from, you know, 80 to 200 hertz is just like 20 dB above the rest of the band, and then everything else just kind of slopes off. I feel like the system could be better if they can control the bass. But again, you know, that is what it is. Let's head into the shop and have Jack talk about some of the pricing and configuration.
Mark, the 6th generation Subaru Outback XT. This is the last model year of this generation Outback. They've already updated the Forester, so this is going to get a lot of that car's updates. So the body structure, interior styling, exterior styling, and probably drivetrain updates as well.
And we're going to close out this generation by talking about it, because what this will mean for a lot of people is going to the lot or trying to buy one. There'll be more discounts on these. It'll be easier to get before the new model comes out. And we haven't covered the XT or extra tough version of this before, and I was really curious to see how the turbocharged application would compare to just what we've been dealing with.
So for 25, they expanded the number of trim levels available. With the turbocharged 2.4 liter, it makes, let's say, mid 200s in horsepower and almost 300 foot-pounds of torque. It's like 270 something. It's a decent amount of power. It still uses the same Lineartronic CVT. It has symmetrical all-wheel drive. The prices for these vehicles with destination range, the base model is just over $30,000, and this is just over $44,000. So there's a pretty healthy price spread. If you go to a Wilderness Edition, you get another couple inches of ground clearance. Though all of the non-Wilderness variants of like 8.7, which for a wagony SUV,
this is
pretty impressive.
Like, you know, you don't really see it on the outside, but like when we put it on the lift, you notice how much ground clearance there is. And even with this, the non-wilderness trim, I think for most suburbanites or people that are, you know, not trailing or doing any of that, it's way more ground clearance.
Or if you just need to go to a campsite, you could do that as well.
Yeah,
no
I mean, there's no problem with this, and I think that's the big selling feature of something like this. And I have a better appreciation for it now, namely in bad weather. You know, this is a tried and true all-wheel drive system that performs and has been consistently performing.
It's not Nerf like all the other variants.
Right.
It's a symmetrical all-wheel drive.
Yes, it's not a cheesy on-demand that kind of just sends power when it needs it. It really does function well. The ground clearance is legit, and still with this generation, things are easy to get to. You could argue, you know, this thing's going to have some rot and some rust. But I mean,
long-term, not immediately.
Right. So you can still get to things here. It's easy to service mostly. So it's a unique car in its segment.
Subaru global platform, strut front, multi-link rear, mostly steel, some aluminum components. I mean, honestly, you and I are somewhat down on the Subaru performance cars outside of the BRZ. I think this is what they do best. They're commodity sedans, wagons, SUVs.
Well, this is why people are loyal to this brand. It is really doing something that they found a way to make this work. And it really does work. It's not just marketing gimmicks. And it's still, you know, they made the improvements that people want and need from Subaru that they didn't do well in the past, which we'll talk about during the drive. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how this performs on the road, Jack.
All right, Mark, let's do it.
I'm ready. Are you ready?
I'm ready, Mark. I've never been more ready in my entire life.
For turbo power and a CVT?
Show me what Lineartronic means.
This thing moves.
Yeah?
This thing is really quick. And you know, when I got in this, because we've been driving all the non-turbo versions of the commodity Subaru products recently, and they always just feel kind of like lethargic. And you know, the CVT definitely does not help that, but this car, once you're going and you're in, not in gear technically, but when you're rolling and you get on it, this thing's moving like way quicker than anybody needs in a vehicle like this. And I think that's what kind of caught me off guard. And now that I've driven it more too, I found that my biggest takeaway of this is I remember getting in an Outback and a Forester about 10 years ago, and my biggest complaint is they felt like tin cans. They really had a lot of noise, a lot of vibration. They felt really cheap and chintzy. And combined with, you know, the engine sound, it had like 80s and 90s car feel back in the 2000s. And they've put so much work in to isolate this and make it feel more substantial. When you drive it, it really does reward you quite a bit. It's not fatiguing at all. The all-wheel drive system is really, really responsive without leaning on stability control, traction control all the time. I can rip out at any turn, mash on the throttle, it sorts itself out, it's not cutting power, and it rides good. This thing actually rides really well for what it is and its price point.
I am very pleasantly surprised by this vehicle. I spent a lot of time in arguably sort of a competitor, the CX50. I've driven the RAV4, spent a lot of time in the CR-V. I think what this vehicle is offering at a fully loaded price of like just over $44,000 is incredibly compelling. I think this rides better than a CX50. The inputs, the steering in particular, in typical Subaru fashion, is not quite as good, but the drivetrain, I think, is actually well paired with the CVT and the torque of the turbocharged 4-popper. Because all the torque comes in early.
Yes.
You don't have to deal with the horrible CVT rubber band effect. You get on it, you get in the torque, and then you let off. I think that's, to your point, I'm pleasantly surprised. I think this is really, really impressive for what it is.
It is, and you know, we were talking about this in the shop. It doesn't have the on-demand systems that a lot of the economy SUVs do. So the benefit of it, the way that it is calibrated, it doesn't feel like everything's reactive to your inputs. Like once you start losing grip, the all-wheel drive system isn't just there like, oh, let me straighten it out. The stability control is not just like, oh, let me just turn off the power. This thing constantly is rotating in a way that's natural, and you're not fighting the car constantly, and the power is always there because of it. Like you don't have to wait for the kick-down effect of a traditional transmission, and this thing just moves so effortlessly. And you know, the other thing is, not to knock on Mazda particularly, but the CX50 is a really good example because they're in a similar price category. And
the premium long-termer that we have, the fully loaded one's the same price as this.
This rides better.
Yes.
It's more comfortable. I feel like it's more refined. The all-wheel drive system is more reactive. It's just a better overall vehicle, aside from, you know, you can argue like looks and interior tech and all
steering.
that, and steering. The steering is definitely very, very easy. But again, probably the person that's buying this doesn't want to be sitting there with like, you know, two-hand effort. They want to like turn with their pinky, and I think they know their market here.
While they're listening to NPR and they have their turtleneck on.
Yeah.
This is Subaru. I think it comes down to what your expectations are in these vehicles. We've driven so many of them, particularly on this channel and just in our own personal lives. For our roads, straight lines, not fun, twisty back roads. You deal with snow probably a third of the year. You deal with inclement weather probably 40% of the year.
Yeah.
This thing makes a lot of sense. It's isolated. You know, the driving experience for somebody who's just putting around in this thing is pretty good. I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised by the Outback. I mean, I know you have your problems with the interior space, and I'm not going to forgive it for that. I do think that Mazda, really all of its competitors, do infotainment better. They do a lot of the interior features better than this vehicle. But for 44 grand, this thing's fully loaded. It's got a great drivetrain. The CVT is not annoying, surprisingly, and the all-wheel drive system is probably the best in its immediate class.
Yeah, Jack, I mean, I think you summed it up, and I'll kind of cover the extra details and the final thoughts. What I will say is I'm really, really pleased with where they've gotten as a brand with these types of vehicles, because they've made this not feel like a total shitbox. It's far more substantial. And if they can just get to the next level in not overcomplicating some of the other parts of this, it would be a really well-balanced brand overall. And you know, not every car is perfect. They're always going to have some issue. But man, this is so good as for what it is. I can't wait to drive the new Forester.
You mean Outback?
Well, Outback and Forester.
We drove the new Forester.
Oh, we did already?
Yeah.
Oh, that's how memorable it was? Final thoughts on the Subaru Outback XT. It's clear that Jack and I were very, very happy with the way this drove, and there's a couple reasons why. The turbocharged application allows this to feel far more free in terms of driving experience. It doesn't feel like it's cobbled or like you're really having to overly push this car to get it going. The CVT tuning is really good for what it is and a regular vehicle, and their driving dynamics and controls team did a tremendous job on this. And when I talk about that, it's really a combination of factors. It handles and rides really well in every condition. It's supple, it's not noisy, it's not jostling you around. You can get on bad pavement or good pavement and you feel like you have incredible control. The all-wheel drive system is very proactive and reactive at the same time to keep you in check without you understeering off the road. There's just enough rotation where wherever your steering input goes, the car follows. And the all-wheel drive really helps with that. The fact that they're not cutting power and leaning on their stability control, hitting the brakes all the time, and and cutting power means you can power out of a turn and always have power ready. So the combination of all these factors together is this is one of the best Subarus we've driven. I think they really put a lot of effort into the drivetrain tuning and how everything is cohesive for the driver. And even if you don't care about driving, I mean, it's quiet, it's comfortable, it handles well and rides well for just a normal person if you're not pushing it. But it really is the most complete package we felt Subaru has put to date. And you know, a lot of the interior stuff's way better. It's a quieter cabin. I just wish that they could put more effort and get that budget allocated to get the tech stuff fixed. I'm gonna leave it at that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next video.